The October wind cut through Redemption Falls like a blade, carrying with it the scent of approaching winter and the promise of hardship to come. Sheriff Daniel Crawford pulled his coat tighter as he walked down Main Street, his boots echoing hollowly on the wooden sidewalk. At 31, Daniel had been keeping the peace in this small Wyoming Territory town for nearly 5 years, ever since he drifted in after the war with nowhere else to go. The town was typical of the frontier, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a single dusty street, surrounded by endless prairie that stretched to the horizon. The general store, saloon, church, and courthouse formed the heart of civilization in this remote corner of the world, while scattered homesteads dotted the landscape beyond the town limits. Daniel paused outside Murphy's general store, where a small crowd had gathered. Through the window, he could see old Murphy himself gesticulating wildly, his face red with indignation. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, stood beside him with her arms crossed, her expression stern and unforgiving. "Sheriff Crawford," Murphy called out as Daniel pushed through the door. "Thank God you're here. We got ourselves a thief." Daniel's eyes adjusted to the dim interior of the store, taking in the scene. Near the back corner, huddled between sacks of flour and bolts of fabric, sat a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with auburn hair that had escaped from beneath a worn bonnet and clothes that had seen better days. What struck Daniel immediately was her condition. She was clearly pregnant, probably 6 or 7 months along. "What's the situation, Murphy?" Daniel asked, his voice calm and professional. "Caught her red-handed," Murphy declared, pointing an accusing finger at the woman. "Stuffing food into her coat pockets. Bread, jerky, a can of peaches. Bold as brass she was." Daniel looked at the woman, noting her pale complexion and the way she kept one protective hand over her swollen belly. Her eyes met his, large, green, and filled with desperation rather than defiance. "What's your name, miss?" Daniel asked gently. "Elena," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Elena Morrison." "Morrison," Mrs. Henderson sniffed disdainfully. "Never heard that name around these parts. Probably just made it up. Where are you from, Elena?" Daniel continued, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's interruption. "Kansas," Elena replied, her voice a little stronger now. "My husband, he died of fever 3 weeks ago. I've been traveling west, trying to reach my sister in California." "That's a likely story," Murphy scoffed. "Sheriff, she stole nearly $2 worth of goods. In broad daylight. We can't have vagrants thinking they can just waltz into town and help themselves to whatever they please." Daniel studied Elena's face, seeing the exhaustion etched in every line, the hollow look of someone who hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Her hands were rough and calloused, the hands of someone who had worked hard for everything she'd ever had. "Did you take the food, Elena?" he asked quietly. She closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "Yes, I haven't eaten in 2 days. The baby," she touched her belly again. "I was afraid for the baby. You see," Murphy turned to the gathered crowd. "She admits it. Theft is theft, Sheriff. The law is the law." Daniel sighed heavily. Murphy was right about the law, but everything in Daniel rebelled against arresting a pregnant woman who was clearly desperate and alone. Still, he had sworn an oath to uphold the law, and half the town was watching. "I'm sorry, Elena," he said softly. "I have to take you in, but we'll get this sorted out." Elena didn't resist as Daniel helped her to her feet. She was lighter than he expected, and he could feel the tremor in her arms. Whatever her story, she was genuinely in distress. The walk to the jail was a parade of shame, with townspeople lining the street to gawk at the pregnant thief. Daniel heard the whispers following them. "Disgraceful. Probably unmarried. What kind of woman travels alone in her condition? No better than she should be." The jail was a small, sturdy building with 2 cells and Daniel's modest living quarters in the back. He unlocked the first cell and gestured for Elena to enter. "I know it's not much," he said apologetically, "but I'll make sure you're comfortable. Are you hungry?" Elena's eyes filled with tears at the unexpected kindness. "I don't have any money to pay for food." "Don't worry about that right now." Daniel brought her a blanket and a cup of water. "The trial will be tomorrow morning." Judge Morrison will decide what happens next. Morrison. Elena looked up sharply. Did you say Morrison? That's right. Judge Cornelius Morrison. He's been the territorial judge here for about 3 years. Tough but fair, most folks say. Daniel paused. Why? Do you know him? Elena's face had gone even paler. Morrison was my husband's name. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Your husband's name was Morrison? Elena Morrison? She nodded slowly. Thomas Morrison. He was Judge Morrison's nephew. The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. If Elena was telling the truth, then she was the widow of Judge Morrison's nephew, a nephew who had apparently never told his family about his marriage. This complicated everything. Elena, Daniel said carefully, does the judge know about you? About your marriage to his nephew? No, she whispered. Thomas and his uncle had disagreements. Thomas left home when he was 18 and never looked back. He said his family would never accept me because I was... She trailed off, looking embarrassed. Because you were what? Because I was poor. Because I worked in a tavern when Thomas met me. Because I wasn't good enough for a Morrison. Her voice was bitter now. Thomas married me anyway, but he said it was better if his family never knew. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, feeling the situation growing more complicated by the moment. Judge Morrison was known for his strict interpretation of the law and his harsh sentences. He was also known for his pride in the Morrison family name and his disdain for what he considered lower classes. Elena, do you have any proof of your marriage to Thomas? She reached in her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The marriage certificate. It's all I have left of him. Daniel examined the document. It looked genuine, a marriage certificate from Dodge City, Kansas, dated 18 months ago. Thomas Morrison and Elena Walsh joined in holy matrimony. This is good, Daniel said. This proves you were legally married. That might help your case. But even as he said it, Daniel wasn't sure it would help at all. Judge Morrison was not a forgiving man, and learning that his nephew had married beneath his station might only make things worse for Elena. That evening, Daniel sat in his office, staring at Elena's marriage certificate and trying to figure out what to do. Through the thin walls, he could hear her moving restlessly in her cell, probably unable to sleep on the hard cot. Every so often, a small sound escaped her, a sigh, a muffled sob, the creak of the cot as she tried to find a comfortable position. Daniel had seen a lot of hardship in his years as sheriff, but something about Elena's situation struck him deeply. Maybe it was the vulnerability of her condition, or the quiet dignity with which she faced her circumstances. Or maybe it was the loneliness he recognized in her eyes, the same loneliness he saw in his own mirror every morning. He had been alone since returning from the war, content with his solitary life and simple duties. But tonight, listening to Elena's quiet distress, he felt that loneliness more acutely than he had in years. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Daniel opened it to find Dr. Samuel Hayes, the town's only physician, standing on the doorstep with his medical bag. Evening, Daniel, the older man said. I heard you arrested a pregnant woman today. Thought I should check on her condition. That's thoughtful of you, Document. She's in the first cell. Dr. Hayes was a kind man in his 60s who had delivered most of the babies born in Redemption Falls over the past decade. He examined Elena gently while Daniel waited outside the cell, respecting her privacy. She's malnourished and exhausted, the doctor reported quietly when he emerged. The baby seems to be developing normally, but she needs proper food and rest. How long will she be here? Trial's tomorrow. Judge Morrison will decide her fate. Dr. Hayes frowned. Morrison? That's a harsh man for a woman in her condition to face. What did she steal? Food. Less than $2 worth. And what's the penalty for theft in this county? Daniel's stomach tightened. Depends on the judge's mood. Could be jail time, could be a fine, could be... He couldn't bring himself to say it. Could be hanging, Dr. Hayes finished grimly. Daniel, you can't let that happen. Not to a pregnant woman. I don't make the law, Document. I just enforce it. Sometimes a man has to choose between the law and what's right. After the doctor left, Daniel sat in the darkness of his office, wrestling with his conscience. He had always prided himself on being a man of principle, someone who did his duty regardless of personal feelings. But the thought of Elena facing Judge Morrison's judgment, especially given the family connection, filled him with dread. Near midnight, he heard Elena call out softly, "Sheriff Crawford?" Daniel approached her cell. In the dim light from his office, she looked impossibly young and fragile. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "The baby's moving a lot tonight. I think he knows something's wrong." She looked up at Daniel with those large green eyes. "Sheriff, I want you to know I'm not a thief. I never stole anything before in my life. But when you're carrying a child and you haven't eaten in days, you don't have to explain to me, Elena. I do, though. I need someone to know that I'm not what they think I am. I was married to a good man who loved me. We had a little farm outside Dodge City. We were happy." Her voice broke slightly. "When Thomas died, I lost everything. The farm, our animals, everything we'd built together. I had nothing left but the baby and the hope that my sister would take us in." Daniel found himself gripping the bars of her cell. "Tell me about Thomas." A small smile crossed Elena's face. "He was kind, patient. He taught me to read and write properly, helped me see that I was worth more than I'd always believed. He used to say that his family's opinion didn't matter because we had each other." The smile faded. "I just wish he'd lived to see his child." In that moment, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't control what happened in court tomorrow, but he could make sure Elena faced it with some dignity and strength. "Elena," he said quietly, "tomorrow's going to be difficult, but I want you to know you're not facing alone." As the first light of dawn crept through the jail's small windows, Daniel prepared himself for what might be the most important day of his life. He had no idea what Judge Morrison would decide, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let Elena hang. Whatever it took, he would find a way to save her. The trial was set for 10 o'clock, and already Daniel could hear the town stirring to life outside. Soon, the courthouse would be packed with curious onlookers, all eager to see justice dispensed upon the pregnant thief. But justice, Daniel was beginning to realize, might require more courage than he had ever imagined. The courthouse in Redemption Falls was a modest affair. A single large room with wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge, and windows that let in the harsh morning light. By 9:30, every seat was filled, with more townspeople standing along the walls. Word had spread quickly about the pregnant woman who had stolen food, and everyone wanted to witness the spectacle of her trial. Daniel escorted Elena from the jail to the courthouse, noting how she held her head high despite the whispers and stares that followed them. She had managed to tidy her appearance somewhat, smoothing her auburn hair back beneath her bonnet and straightening her worn dress as best she could. The marriage certificate was clutched in her hand like a talisman. Judge Cornelius Morrison presided from behind his imposing oak desk, his stern features set in their usual expression of grave authority. He was a tall, lean man in his early 60s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to see through to a person's very soul. His black robes made him appear even more formidable, and the gavel in his hand might as well have been a weapon. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Morrison," called out the court clerk, a nervous young man named Finch. The courtroom rose as one, the wooden floor creaking under the weight of so many bodies. Daniel felt Elena sway slightly beside him and steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Be seated," Judge Morrison commanded, his voice carrying easily through the room. "We are here today to try the case of the Territory versus Elena Morrison, accused of theft in the first degree." Daniel saw Elena flinch at the use of her married name, and he noticed Judge Morrison's eyebrows raise slightly at the surname. But the judge's expression remained impassive as he consulted his papers. "What does the defendant plead?" Judge Morrison asked. Elena stood slowly, her voice barely audible. "Guilty, Your Honor." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Daniel had advised her to plead guilty, hoping that honesty and remorse might earn her some leniency. "Speak up," the judge ordered sharply. "The court must hear your plea clearly." "Guilty, Your Honor," Elena repeated, louder this time. Judge Morrison made a note, then looked up at the assembly. "Very well. Mr. Murphy, present your complaint." Old Murphy stood and launched into a detailed account of catching Elena with stolen food, his indignation growing with each word. He painted a picture of a brazen thief who had waltzed into his store with no regard for law or decency. She admitted to the theft immediately, Murphy concluded, showed no remorse whatsoever, said she was hungry, as if that excuses breaking the law. "Thank you, Mr. Murphy," Judge Morrison said. "Sheriff Crawford, present your report." Daniel stood, his mouth suddenly dry. "Your Honor, I arrested Mrs. Morrison yesterday afternoon on charges of theft. She was cooperative and offered no resistance. The stolen items were valued at approximately $1.75. And what is your assessment of the defendant's character?" This was the moment Daniel had been dreading. He looked at Elena, seeing the fear in her eyes, then back at the judge. "Your Honor, Mrs. Morrison appears to be a woman in desperate circumstances. She claims to be recently widowed and traveling to reach family in California. She was clearly malnourished and exhausted when arrested." "Claims to be widowed?" Judge Morrison's voice sharpened. "Do you have evidence of this alleged marriage?" Daniel felt every eye in the courtroom turn to him. "Yes, Your Honor. She possesses a marriage certificate." Approach the bench. Daniel walked forward and handed over the marriage certificate. He watched Judge Morrison's face carefully as the man read it, noting the slight tightening around the eyes when he saw his nephew's name. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Morrison studied the document. Elena's breathing was shallow and rapid, and Daniel could see her gripping the back of her chair for support. Finally, Judge Morrison looked up. "This certificate appears to be genuine. However, the court notes that there is no record of this marriage being recognized by the Morrison family." Elena gasped softly, and Daniel felt his heart sink. The judge was going to use the family's ignorance of the marriage against her. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, the defendant's current circumstances, traveling alone, without resources, reduced to theft, raised questions about the legitimacy of her claims. "Your Honor," Elena spoke up suddenly, her voice stronger than before. "I can prove I was married to Thomas Morrison. You may speak." Elena reached into her coat and pulled out a small, worn photograph. "This is our wedding photograph, taken in Dodge City." Thomas wrote on the back. She handed the photograph to Daniel, who carried it to the judge. Judge Morrison examined it closely, his expression unreadable. Daniel caught a glimpse of it, a young couple standing before a church, the man bearing a strong resemblance to the judge himself. "This proves nothing," Judge Morrison said finally, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Photographs can be obtained by anyone." Elena's shoulders slumped in defeat, but she wasn't finished. "Your Honor, Thomas used to tell me stories about his childhood, about the scar on his uncle's hand from when he tried to help birth a calf when he was 12, about the way his uncle always carried a silver pocket watch that belonged to his father." Judge Morrison's hand moved instinctively to his vest pocket, where the chain of his silver watch was visible. Daniel saw the involuntary reaction and knew that Elena's details were accurate. "Thomas told me about the argument they had." Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with desperation. "About how his uncle wanted him to become a lawyer, but Thomas wanted a farm. About how harsh words were spoken that neither of them knew how to take back." The courtroom was deadly silent now. Judge Morrison's face had gone pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he set down the photograph. "Even if your marriage was legitimate," the judge said finally, his voice hoarse, "it does not excuse your crime. Theft is theft, regardless of circumstances." "Your Honor," Daniel interrupted, stepping forward. "Given the defendant's condition and circumstances, surely the court can show mercy. She's pregnant, alone, and clearly in need of help rather than punishment." Judge Morrison's cold blue eyes fixed on Daniel. "Sheriff Crawford, are you suggesting that this court ignore the law based on sentiment?" "I'm suggesting that justice should be tempered with mercy, Your Honor. The law is clear, Sheriff. Theft in the first degree carries a mandatory sentence. The court has no discretion in this matter." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. He knew what Judge Morrison was saying, Elena would hang. However, the judge continued, There is one provision under territorial law that might apply to this case. The courtroom leaned forward collectively, straining to hear. A pregnant woman who is married to a citizen in good standing may have her sentence commuted to the custody of her husband, provided he accepts full responsibility for her actions and future conduct. Elena's eyes widened in confusion. But, Your Honor, my husband is dead. Indeed, Judge Morrison replied, his gaze shifting to Daniel, which is why the law provides for a second option. Should a citizen of good standing be willing to marry the defendant and accept responsibility for her, the sentence may be similarly commuted. The courthouse erupted in shocked murmurs. Daniel felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Your Honor, he managed to say, are you suggesting? I am suggesting nothing, Sheriff. I am informing you of the law. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The choice is simple. Find someone willing to marry the defendant and accept responsibility for her actions, or carry out the sentence as prescribed by law. Daniel looked at Elena, seeing the hope and terror warring in her eyes. She understood what was being offered and what was at stake. How long do I have to consider this? Daniel asked. Court will recess for 1 hour, Judge Morrison announced, banging his gavel sharply. When we reconvene, you will inform the court of your decision. If no one steps forward to marry the defendant, the sentence will be carried out at dawn tomorrow. As the courtroom began to empty, Elena sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Daniel stood frozen, his mind reeling with the implications of what had just occurred. Dr. Hayes approached the bench where Elena sat. Let me help you back to the jail, my dear. You need to rest. Doctor, Elena said quietly, looking up at Daniel, what happens if no one, if Sheriff Crawford doesn't? Don't think about that now, Dr. Hayes said gently, but his eyes met Daniel's with a clear message. You know what you have to do. As Daniel escorted Elena back to the jail, neither of them spoke. The weight of the decision ahead pressed down on them both like a physical burden. In 1 hour, Daniel would have to choose between his comfortable, solitary life and saving the life of a woman he barely knew. But as he looked at Elena, saw the way she protectively cradled her unborn child, Daniel realized that perhaps the choice had already been made. Perhaps it had been made the moment he first saw her in Murphy's store, desperate and alone. The question now was whether he had the courage to follow through with it. In the jail, Elena sat on the edge of her cot, staring at her hands. You don't have to do this, she said without looking up. I know what the judge is asking of you. It's too much to expect from a stranger. Daniel pulled a chair close to her cell and sat down. Elena, tell me honestly, do you want to live? She looked up at him then, tears streaming down her face. Yes. For my baby, yes. But not at the cost of ruining your life. What if it doesn't ruin my life? What if it saves it? The words surprised them both. Daniel hadn't meant to say them, but he realized they were true. He had been drifting through life since the war, going through the motions without really living. Maybe this was his chance to do something that mattered. I don't understand, Elena whispered. I've been alone for a long time, Daniel said slowly. Maybe too long. Maybe this is God's way of giving us both a second chance. Outside, the church bell chimed 11 o'clock. In 1 hour, they would have to face Judge Morrison again. In 1 hour, Daniel would have to make the most important decision of his life. As he looked into Elena's green eyes, seeing the hope beginning to kindle there, Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The hour passed like a lifetime and an instant all at once. Daniel spent the time pacing his small office while Elena remained in her cell, both of them lost in their own thoughts about what was to come. The weight of the decision pressed down on Daniel's shoulders like a physical burden, but beneath the fear and uncertainty, something else was growing, a sense of rightness he hadn't felt in years. At 10 minutes before noon, Dr. Hayes returned to the jail, carrying a small bundle. I brought some things for Elena, he said quietly, handing Daniel a clean dress, a hairbrush, and some other feminine necessities. Whatever happens in that courtroom, she should face it with dignity. Daniel unlocked Elena's cell and handed her the bundle. The doctor thought you might want to prepare yourself. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she examined the simple blue dress. It's beautiful, but why would he? Because you're not facing this alone, Dr. Hayes said firmly. This town may not have shown you much kindness so far, but that doesn't mean there's no kindness to be found. As Elena changed behind a blanket Daniel hung for privacy, the older man pulled Daniel aside. Son, I've been thinking about what Judge Morrison said in there, about the law requiring a citizen of good standing to take responsibility. What about it? That law was written for extreme circumstances. It's meant to give judges an alternative to execution when mercy is warranted. But it's also meant to ensure that whoever steps forward is genuinely committed to the responsibility they're accepting. Daniel nodded grimly. I understand what I'd be taking on. Document. Do you? You'd be legally responsible for Elena's actions from this day forward. If she commits another crime, you could face charges as well. If she runs away, you could be held accountable for any damages she might cause. It's not just marriage, Daniel. It's becoming her guardian in the eyes of the law. And if no one steps forward, Dr. Hayes's expression was grim. Judge Morrison isn't known for his mercy. The letter of the law says death for theft, and he's not one to bend rules for sentiment. Elena emerged from behind the blanket, transformed by the clean dress and the simple act of fixing her hair. She looked younger, more vulnerable, but also stronger somehow, as if the kindness shown by Dr. Hayes had reminded her of her own worth. Thank you, she said to the doctor, her voice thick with emotion. I haven't felt like myself in so long. You look lovely, my dear, Dr. Hayes replied. Now, both of you need to understand something before you go back into that courtroom. Whatever decision you make today, it's going to change everything. Not just for the two of you, but for this whole town. What do you mean? Daniel asked. People are talking, Daniel. Some are saying you're a fool for even considering this. Others are saying it's the most decent thing they've ever seen. This decision is going to define who you are in the eyes of everyone here. Are you the sheriff who follows orders without question, or are you the man who stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult? Elena reached through the bars and touched Daniel's hand. I need you to know something, she said softly. If you choose to walk away, I won't blame you. This isn't your burden to carry. Daniel looked down at her small hand on his, feeling the calluses from hard work, the slight tremor of fear and hope. Elena, if I do this, if I marry you, I need to know that you're willing to try to make it work. Not just as a legal arrangement, but as a real marriage. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been alone for too long. I'm saying that maybe we could help each other heal from our losses. I'm saying that your baby deserves a father, and maybe I deserve a chance at a family. Elena's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or pity. What she saw there made her breath catch. You would do that? You would raise Thomas's child as your own? I would be honored to. The simple honesty of his words broke down the last of Elena's resistance. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll try to make it work. I'll try to be a good wife to you. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat gently. It's time. The whole town will be waiting. The walk back to the courthouse felt different this time. Daniel walked beside Elena, not as a sheriff escorting a prisoner, but as a man about to make the most important commitment of his life. The townspeople they passed stared openly, some with curiosity, others with disapproval, but Daniel kept his eyes forward. Inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Every seat was filled again, and the air buzzed with whispered speculation. Judge Morrison sat behind his bench like a figure of doom, his expression unreadable. All rise, called the court clerk. The assembly stood, and Daniel felt Elena's hand slip into his. Her fingers were cold, but steady. Be seated, Judge Morrison commanded. Has the defendant secured a citizen willing to accept responsibility for her through marriage? Daniel stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. Yes, Your Honor. I, Sheriff Daniel Crawford, am willing to marry Elena Morrison and accept full legal responsibility for her actions. The courthouse erupted in gasps and excited murmurs. Someone in the back shouted, "Have you lost your mind, Sheriff?" But Daniel ignored the outburst. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for order. Sheriff Crawford, do you understand the full implications of what you are proposing? You will be legally bound to this woman and financially responsible for any crime she might commit. You would also be accepting her unborn child as your own. I understand completely, Your Honor. And you, Mrs. Morrison, do you accept Sheriff Crawford's proposal of marriage? Elena stood, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. I do, Your Honor. Judge Morrison studied them both for a long moment, his cold blue eyes unreadable. Very well. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, and in accordance with territorial statutes regarding the commutation of capital sentences, I hereby pronounce you husband and wife. The judge's gavel came down with finality. Mrs. Crawford, your sentence is commuted to the custody of your husband. Sheriff Crawford, you are now legally responsible for your wife's conduct and debts. May God have mercy on your souls. The courtroom buzzed with excited conversation as people began filing out, eager to spread the news of the most unusual wedding in Redemption Falls history. But Daniel barely heard them. He was looking at Elena, his wife, and seeing the tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. It's done, he said quietly, taking her hands in his. It's done, she agreed, her voice trembling with emotion. Dr. Hayes approached them with a warm smile. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Crawford. Now, let's get Elena back to rest. It's been a long day for someone in her condition. As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Judge Morrison called out, Sheriff Crawford, a moment, if you please. Daniel approached the bench while Elena waited by the door. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most foolish, the judge said quietly. I hope for both your sakes it was the former. Your Honor, may I ask you something? Judge Morrison nodded. Did you know Thomas? Your nephew. The judge's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. I knew him. He was a good boy who grew into a good man, despite our differences. His father, my brother, died when Thomas was young. I tried to guide him, but he had his own ideas about life. He chose well when he married Elena. Judge Morrison looked across the courtroom at Elena, who was accepting congratulations from Dr. Hayes. Perhaps he did. Perhaps they both chose well. He paused. Sheriff, that woman is carrying my nephew's child, my family's blood. I trust you'll remember that. I will, Your Honor. See that you do. As Daniel and Elena walked back to his house, their house now, neither spoke of the enormous step they had just taken. But when Elena stumbled slightly on the uneven wooden sidewalk, Daniel was there to steady her. And when she looked up at him with gratitude and the beginning of something deeper, he felt the last of his doubts fade away. They had chosen each other in the most desperate of circumstances, but perhaps that was exactly what they both needed. Time would tell if their marriage of necessity could become something more, but Daniel was determined to find out. Behind them, the courthouse bell chimed 1 o'clock, marking not just the hour, but the beginning of their new life together. Behind them, the courthouse bell chimed 1 o'clock, marking not just the hour, but the beginning of their new life together. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and winter had settled over Redemption Falls with a vengeance. Snow blanketed the town and surrounding prairie, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. Inside the small house that Daniel and Elena now shared, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the modest but comfortable rooms. Elena stood at the kitchen window, one hand resting on her now prominently rounded belly, watching Daniel clear snow from their front path. At 8 months pregnant, she moved carefully but with purpose, having settled into the rhythms of their shared life with surprising ease. Their marriage had begun as a desperate arrangement to save her life, but something genuine and tender had grown between them during the long winter evenings. Daniel had been patient and kind, giving Elena time to heal from Thomas's death, while slowly opening his own heart to the possibility of love again. The townspeople had gradually accepted the unusual circumstances of their union. Elena's quiet dignity and willingness to help wherever she could had won over most of the women, while Daniel's continued competence as sheriff had reassured the men that his judgment hadn't been completely compromised. Elena turned from the window as Daniel stomped through the front door, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the scent of snow. It's getting worse out there, he said, hanging his coat on the peg by the door. We might be snowed in for a few days. Good, Elena replied, surprising him with her smile. I like having you all to myself. Daniel felt the familiar warmth that her words always brought him. Over the weeks, Elena had begun to speak more freely about her feelings, and each small declaration of affection felt like a gift. How are you feeling today? He asked, as had become his custom each morning and evening. Heavy, she admitted with a laugh. This baby feels like he's grown twice his size just since yesterday. Daniel approached her carefully, still somewhat shy about the intimacy their situation required. May I? He asked, gesturing toward her belly. Elena nodded, taking his hands and placing them where the baby was most active. Daniel's eyes widened as he felt the strong kicks and movements. He's definitely his father's son, Elena said softly. Thomas was always restless too. There was no jealousy in Daniel's heart when Elena spoke of Thomas. He understood that her first husband would always hold a place in her heart, and he was grateful that she felt comfortable sharing those memories with him. He's going to be strong, Daniel observed, feeling another particularly vigorous kick. And stubborn, I think, Elena added. He doesn't seem inclined to let me sleep much at night. Dr. Hayes had been visiting regularly to check on Elena's progress, and he had assured them both that everything was proceeding normally. The baby was due within the next few weeks, and Daniel found himself both excited and terrified at the prospect of becoming a father. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment. Daniel opened it to find Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, standing on their porch with a covered basket. Good morning, Sheriff, Mrs. Crawford, she said formally. I brought some fresh bread and preserves. This was a new development. Mrs. Henderson had been one of Elena's harshest critics during the trial, but her attitude had gradually softened as she observed Elena's genuine efforts to contribute to the community. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Henderson, Elena said, accepting the basket gratefully. Would you like to come in for some coffee? The older woman hesitated, then nodded. Just for a moment. I wanted to speak with you about something. They settled in the small parlor, where Mrs. Henderson accepted a cup of coffee and studied Elena with careful eyes. Mrs. Crawford, she began formally, I owe you an apology. When you first arrived in town, I judged you harshly based on appearances and circumstances. I've come to realize that was wrong of me. Elena's eyes widened in surprise. Mrs. Henderson, that's very gracious of you, but please let me finish. The older woman held up a hand. I've watched you these past months. The way you've helped Mrs. Murphy when she was ill, how you've assisted with the church preparations, your kindness to the children. You've shown yourself to be a woman of good character, and I was wrong to think otherwise. Daniel felt a surge of pride, watching his wife handle the situation with grace and dignity. I appreciate your words, Elena said quietly. I know my arrival here was unconventional. I try to prove myself worthy of the second chance Sheriff Crawford gave me. You've done more than that, dear. You've become a valuable member of our community. Mrs. Henderson paused, then continued with obvious emotion. There's something else. My own daughter died in childbirth 5 years ago, far from home with no family nearby. When I see you here, about to bring new life into this world, it reminds me that we all deserve compassion and support during life's most vulnerable moments. Elena reached across the small space between them and took Mrs. Henderson's hand. I'm sorry for your loss. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. Thank you, dear. Which brings me to why I'm really here. Mrs. Henderson straightened, becoming more businesslike. Several of the women in town have been talking. We want to help when your time comes. Mrs. O'Malley has experience as a midwife, and we've organized a circle of ladies to assist with cooking, cleaning, and caring for you after the birth. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. I never expected. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. I never expected. You're one of us now, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. That's what neighbors do for each other. After Mrs. Henderson left, Elena sat quietly by the fire, her hands resting on her belly. Daniel could see she was moved by the unexpected offer of support. Feeling better about her situation? He asked gently. I never imagined I could feel so accepted. When Thomas died, I thought I was completely alone in the world. But here, with you, with these people, she wiped away a tear. I feel like I have a home again. Daniel sat beside her on the small sofa, carefully putting his arm around her shoulders. You do have a home. We both do. Elena leaned against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall, but inside their small house, warmth and contentment reigned. Daniel, Elena said softly, there's something I need to tell you. What is it? I've been thinking about what happens after the baby comes, about our future together. Daniel felt his heart rate increase. They had both been carefully avoiding discussions of the long-term implications of their marriage, focusing instead on day-to-day life and the immediate concern of the baby's arrival. What about our future? Elena turned to look at him directly, her green eyes serious and intent. This marriage began as a way to save my life. We both know that. But these past months, Daniel, I need you to know that what I feel for you now is real. It's not just gratitude or convenience. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Elena, I love you, she said simply. I know it might seem impossible, given how we started, but it's true. You've been kind and patient and good to me when you had no obligation to be. You've given me a home and a future for my child. But more than that, you've given me hope again. Daniel felt emotions welling up inside him that he had thought were buried forever. I love you too, he said, his voice rough with feeling. I think I started falling in love with you that first day in the courthouse, watching you face down Judge Morrison with such courage. They looked at each other for a long moment, and then Daniel leaned forward and kissed her gently. It was their first real kiss as husband and wife, not born of desperation or necessity, but of genuine affection and love. When they broke apart, Elena smiled through her tears. So what happens now? Now we build a real marriage, a real family. We raise this baby together and see what the future brings. 2 weeks later, on a cold February morning, Elena's labor began. Daniel sent for Dr. Hayes and Mrs. O'Malley, then paced nervously in his small office while the women took over his house. The sounds coming from the bedroom, Elena's labored breathing, the quiet encouragements of the women attending her, made him feel helpless and terrified. Dr. Hayes emerged from the bedroom periodically to update him. Everything's progressing normally, he assured Daniel during one such visit. First babies often take their time, but Elena's strong. She's doing well. The labor lasted through the day and into the evening. As the sun set over the snow-covered prairie, Daniel found himself praying more fervently than he had since the war. He prayed for Elena's safety, for the baby's health, for the wisdom to be a good father to a child that wasn't his by blood, but would be his in every way that mattered. Finally, as the courthouse clock struck midnight, the sound Daniel had been waiting for filled the house. The strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Dr. Hayes appeared in the doorway, his face wreathed in smiles. Congratulations, Daniel. You have a son. Daniel felt his knees go weak with relief. Elena, she's tired but fine. She's asking for you. Daniel entered the bedroom with trembling hands and a racing heart. Elena lay propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. Daniel, meet your son. She placed the baby in his arms, and Daniel looked down at the tiny face, seeing Thomas's features, but also something that might have been his own imagination, a stubborn set to the jaw that reminded him of Elena. He's beautiful, Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. His name is Thomas Daniel Crawford, Elena said softly. Thomas for his father, Daniel for the man who saved us both. Daniel looked up at her, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift she had just given him. Elena, he's ours, she said firmly. Yours and mine. From this moment forward, he's ours. As Daniel held his son, for that's what the baby was now, regardless of biology, he felt the last pieces of his broken heart heal completely. He had found more than just love in this desperate arrangement. He had found redemption, purpose, and a future worth living. Outside, the February wind continued to howl across the Wyoming prairie, but inside the small house in Redemption Falls, a new family had been born. The lonely sheriff was lonely no more, and the desperate woman who had stolen food to survive had found not just safety, but love and belonging beyond her wildest dreams. 6 months later, as summer returned to the territory and baby Thomas grew strong and healthy, Daniel stood on his porch watching Elena tend her garden. She had transformed the small plot behind their house into a productive vegetable garden, her knowledge of plants and growing things proving invaluable in their harsh environment. Sheriff Crawford called a voice from the street. Daniel turned to see a well-dressed stranger approaching on horseback. The man dismounted and extended his hand in greeting. "I'm James Morrison," the stranger said. "Judge Morrison's son. I've come to meet my nephew." Daniel felt Elena stiffen beside him. She had come around the house at the sound of voices, carrying baby Thomas in her arms. "Mr. Morrison," Daniel said carefully, shaking the man's hand. "We weren't expecting anyone from the family." James Morrison was younger than Daniel had expected, perhaps 30 years old, with kind eyes and an open expression. "My father wrote to me about Thomas's marriage and what happened afterward. I've been traveling for weeks to get here." Elena stepped forward, her chin raised with the same courage Daniel had first admired in the courthouse. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Elena Crawford. This is your nephew, Thomas." James Morrison looked at the baby, and Daniel saw his expression soften immediately. "He has the Morrison eyes," he said quietly, "and his father's nose, I think. Would you like to hold him?" Elena asked, surprising both Daniel and herself with the offer. As James Morrison took his nephew in his arms, his face transformed with wonder and joy. "He's perfect, absolutely perfect. Why have you come?" Elena asked directly. James looked up at her, then at Daniel. "To apologize, first of all, for my family's treatment of Thomas, for not knowing about his marriage, for the way my father handled the trial, and to offer you both something." "What kind of offer?" Daniel asked suspiciously. "Thomas inherited land from our grandfather, a good-sized ranch about 50 miles north of here. It's been sitting empty since grandfather died. I'd like to deed it to his son." He looked down at the baby in his arms. "It's his birthright." Elena and Daniel exchanged glances. The offer was generous, but it also meant leaving Redemption Falls, leaving the community they had worked so hard to build their place in. "That's very kind," Daniel said slowly, "but we've made a life here." "I understand," James replied. "But think about it. The ranch has good water, fertile land, room to grow, and it will be closer to family. My father has realized he made mistakes where Thomas was concerned. He'd like to know his grandson." Elena looked at Daniel, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. "May we have some time to consider your offer?" "Of course. I'll be staying at the hotel for a few days. Take all the time you need." That evening, as they sat by the fire with baby Thomas sleeping between them, Elena and Daniel discussed the unexpected opportunity. "What do you think?" Daniel asked. "I think," Elena said slowly, "that Thomas would want his son to have every advantage we can give him. And I think maybe it's time to stop running from the past and start building toward the future. You want to go? I want to do what's best for our family. All of us." She reached across and took Daniel's hand. "But only if you think it's right. You gave up everything to save me. I won't ask you to give up even more." Daniel looked around their small house, thinking of the life they had built here, the community that had come to accept them. Then he looked at Elena and Thomas, his wife and son, and knew that home wasn't a place. It was the people you loved. "Then let's go build a ranch," he said with a smile. "The three of us together." 6 weeks later, on a bright September morning, Daniel helped Elena and baby Thomas into a wagon loaded with their possessions. Half the town had come to see them off, including Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Hayes, and even old Murphy from the general store. "You write to us," Mrs. Henderson commanded, pressing a basket of food into Elena's hands. "And if you ever need anything at all, you know where to find us." "Thank you," Elena said, tears in her eyes. "For everything. For giving me a chance to belong." As their wagon rolled out of Redemption Falls, Daniel looked back once at the town that had been the scene of so much drama and change. Then he looked forward toward the horizon and whatever adventures awaited them. Beside him, Elena held their son and smiled at the future spreading out before them like the endless Wyoming sky. They had come together in desperation and discovered love. They had been strangers forced into marriage and had chosen to become a family. The road ahead was uncertain, but they would travel it together. The sheriff who had chosen love over law, the woman who had found redemption through courage, and the child who represented hope for a better tomorrow. In the distance, their new life awaited, full of promise and possibility.